The Carpathian Mountains stretched like the spine of a sleeping beast across northern Romania, ancient, quiet, and unknowable. Fog clung to the treetops like it had never left, and on most days the wind whispered stories that only the rocks understood. In the village of Borca, tucked between sharp ridges and pine forests, time moved slowly. Families stayed for generations. Shepherds passed their trade to their children. And life revolved around the land rough, beautiful, and demanding. In 1998, on a chilly September morning, something happened that would echo through the valley for decades. 10-year-old Elena Dobre was last seen tending her family's goats near the ridgeline trail, known as the Old Spine. Her father, Mihai, had built a small wooden shelter up there where she liked to sit, sing to the animals, and sketch in her notebook. It was the kind of day where the sun barely pushed through the clouds. Elena wore her red wool shawl, the one her mother had knit for her birthday, and promised to be home before dusk. But she never came back. By nightfall, Mihai had hiked the entire ridgeline. He called her name until his throat burned. He found the goats clustered near the old shelter, skittish and silent. But no Elena. The villagers formed search parties, men with lanterns and rifles, dogs sniffing the damp ground. The mayor contacted regional police, and by sunrise, helicopters buzzed overhead, sweeping the peaks and valleys for signs of a small girl in red.
They found nothing.
No footprints beyond the shelter, no scraps of clothing, no signs of struggle. It was as if the mountains had opened up and swallowed her whole. Her red shawl never turned up. Her sketchbook was missing too. Only the goats remained, nervous, restless, refusing to return to the same trail for weeks. Mihai was never the same man after that. He stopped shaving, stopped speaking to most people, moved from the family home to a hunting cabin on the edge of the forest. His wife, Anna, tried to hold things together, but when the first snow fell that year and Elena's bed remained untouched, she broke. A year later, Anna left Borca for the city. Mihai didn't stop her. He stayed. He kept searching. Every year on September 17th, the day Elena vanished, Mihai would climb the ridge with a lantern, a pocket knife, and a tin box containing her last drawing, a picture of their family, holding hands in front of the wooden shelter. People in town said he was chasing ghosts, but Mihai wasn't chasing anything. He was waiting. 24 years passed. Seasons changed. Children grew up. The trail was renamed Elena's Walk by locals, and hikers sometimes left little red ribbons on the trees in her memory. And then in late autumn of 2022, Mihai, now gray-bearded, slow in the knees but sharp in the mind, returned to the ridge with an axe and shovel. A storm had knocked over several old trees the week before, and he'd promised the new mayor he'd help clear the path. The wind howled that morning same as it had the day Elena vanished. Mihai didn't flinch. He moved slowly, methodically, hacking through roots and shifting debris. Then as he chopped at the base of a rotted spruce near the trail's curve, his axe struck something that shouldn't have been there. It rang. Metal. Hollow. Beneath the twisted roots, something glinted. He got down on his knees and dug with his hands. The dirt was dark, cold, almost sticky. And then he saw it, a rusted tin lunchbox, the kind he hadn't seen in decades. His hands trembled as he pulled it free. He recognized the sticker on top immediately. A faded cartoon lamb with a red scarf. Elena's. He sat in silence for several minutes, box on his lap, breath caught between terror and hope. His fingers hovered over the latch, too afraid to open it, as if whatever was inside might confirm that this wasn't just a long nightmare. Finally, he flipped the latch. Inside, wrapped in a strip of cloth, were three things: a folded drawing, a small metal key, and a note. The drawing was fresh, not from 1998. It showed a hand-drawn map of the mountains, a red X marked near an old ranger station that had burned down years ago. The key looked like it belonged to a chest or a locker, worn, old, but clearly cared for. The note was written in neat, shaky cursive. "Papa, if you find this, I'm still here." Mihai dropped the box. His breath caught in his chest. He looked up toward the ranger's station long abandoned, half a day's walk north of the trail. Trees had overtaken the path, and no one had gone up that way in over a decade. And yet, she had drawn that path. She had left him this message. Could she be alive? Or had someone found her, kept her? Or worse, was this a cruel trick? Mihai stood clutching the lunchbox to his chest. The wind howled louder now, as if urging him toward the tree line. 24 years ago, The mountain took his daughter. But today it had returned something. And whatever waited at that burned ranger's station, he was going to find it. Mihai didn't sleep that night. The lunchbox sat on his table, opened, the contents carefully laid out like sacred relics. The drawing, the key, the note, it was all too specific, too intimate to be a hoax. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. Her R's curled like little question marks. The P in Papa was formed exactly the same way she wrote it on birthday cards, bent and tall, like it was reaching for the sky. But how? She would be 34 now. And yet the note looked fresh, not faded or yellowed by time. The ink hadn't bled. The paper was clean, as if it had been placed in that box only days ago. He stared at the map again. The red X set about 4 kilometers past the ranger station, through thick, wooded terrain that hadn't been walked in years. That whole section of forest had been closed off in the early 2000s after a series of landslides and a mysterious fire at the outpost. That fire had claimed the ranger's cabin, killed a young forestry officer, and left the region deemed unstable by the county. But Mihai knew those trails better than anyone. He had hunted them in his youth, walked them during sleepless nights. He could find that spot again, with or without help. And that's why, before dawn, he loaded a backpack with rope, a flare gun, gloves, water, a flashlight, and the key. He didn't tell anyone. Not the mayor, not the police, not even the shepherd boy who usually helped him with firewood runs. He needed to be alone. He needed to see the truth with his own eyes. The climb to the old ranger's post took 5 hours. The trail was worse than he remembered. Sections of the path had crumbled off the cliffs. Fallen trees blocked most of the clearings. And the silence. It was deeper than before. Not peaceful, but uneasy. No birds, no wind, just the crackle of twigs underfoot and the ever-present weight of something unseen watching from the trees. The ranger station itself was nothing but blackened stone and rusted nails. The roof had collapsed years ago. Charred beams jutted out from the ground like broken teeth. The scent of old smoke still clung to the earth, despite 2 decades of rain. Mihai stood at the ruins, unfolding Elena's map once again. The red X pointed north. He followed. After nearly 2 hours of climbing through overgrown thickets and across a dry creek bed, he found it. A wooden trapdoor, hidden beneath a mossy rock slab, covered in pine needles and soil. It would have looked like nothing to anyone who didn't know where to step. But Mihai did. He dropped to his knees and cleared the debris. The hinges were rusted but intact. There was a small lock attached, a perfect fit for the key from Elena's box. His fingers shook as he slid it in. It turned with a soft click. He hesitated, heart hammering in his chest. And then he lifted the door. A gust of damp, cold air hit him in the face, stale, old, like the breath of a sealed tomb. Below, a wooden ladder descended into darkness. He clicked on his flashlight. It barely pierced the black. He looked around once, half expecting to hear a voice, a cry. Anything but the forest remained silent. He climbed down. The descent was short, about 10 feet. The air grew colder with each step. At the bottom, he stepped into what looked like a small room. Walls made of stone and timber. A single metal cot bolted to the ground. A rusted tin cup on the floor. A shelf with a few empty cans. And a blanket, faded red, folded neatly in the corner. Then his flashlight beam landed on something that made his knees buckle. A drawing. Pinned to the wall with a nail. A new one. Fresh pencil marks, shading. It showed 2 figures, one small, one tall, walking through trees. Above them, written in the same handwriting, "I knew you'd come." Mihai collapsed onto the cot, breath shallow. His flashlight flickered, then steadied. He was shaking. The room wasn't old, not abandoned, not forgotten. Someone had been here recently. He searched every inch. There were marks on the stone's small scratches. A calendar carved crudely into the wall. 12 months with the last one only partially filled. On the cot, a strand of hair-long, dark human. And then tucked under the blanket, something even stranger. A photograph. Elena as a child standing in front of the same wooden shelter from the trail. But behind her, in the trees. Mihai could swear there was someone else. Faint, in the shadows. A figure watching. He flipped the photo. No note, just a date, June 2022. That was 3 months ago. 24 years after she vanished. Mihai stumbled back, flashlight beam shaking across the walls. Someone had been keeping her here. Or she had returned. Or, worse, she had never left. Suddenly, the sound of a branch snapping echoed from above. Footsteps. Fast, heavy. Then silence. Mihai froze, turned off his flashlight. He waited. Minutes passed, no voice, no movement. He climbed back up, slowly, head rising just above the lip of the trapdoor. The forest was empty, but a small white envelope now sat on the rock beside the open door. He hadn't put it there. With trembling hands, he opened it. Inside was a single line. "Don't stop now, you're close." No signature, no return path. Just trees and secrets that had waited too long. Mihai didn't speak of the underground room to anyone, not yet. He couldn't. The truth was still unraveling, and the forest had a way of punishing those who spoke too soon. That envelope, that drawing on the wall. It was as if someone wanted him to follow but not reveal. Like the moment he spoke it aloud, it would vanish into mist again. But he couldn't forget the photo. Elena in the shelter, the shadow in the background, the date. June 2022. She'd been alive at least recently. That much he believed now with terrifying clarity. And not just alive, but watched. Followed. Maybe even held. But by whom? The police had searched the mountains for weeks back in 1998. They'd found nothing. Not a footprint. Not a thread of that red shawl. And yet here he was, holding evidence someone had moved in and out of a hidden room within walking distance of the trail. It was as if someone had always known these woods better than anyone else. Even Mihai. He returned home in silence, the note still in his coat pocket. "Don't stop now, you're close." That night he stared at the red X on the map again. It wasn't just a location, it was a destination, an endpoint, or a warning. He copied the map onto a separate piece of paper, folded the original carefully, and stored it inside a waterproof pouch. Then as the sun rose over the eastern ridge, he packed a bag and returned to the mountains. But he didn't go alone. He brought a name with him, Maria Luca. She was 8 years old when Elena vanished. Now she was a 32-year-old wildlife biologist, one of the few from Borca who had left the village, studied abroad, and come back. She had written papers on the local forests, mapped forgotten trails, and often hiked off-grid. When Mihai knocked on her door and showed her the drawing, she didn't laugh. She listened. Then she said something he wasn't prepared for. "I saw her," Maria whispered, 3 months ago, in the forest." Mihai blinked. "Elena?" "I didn't know it was her at the time. I thought she was a hiker, pale, thin, eyes like glass. She was just standing on the other side of the ridge, barefoot, holding something in her hands. She disappeared behind the trees before I could call out." Mihai's throat tightened. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because when I came back the next day, the trees were marked." "Marked?" "With these." She opened a drawer and pulled out a bundle of red yarn tied into small symbols, like figures or runes. "I found 5 of these hanging from branches near where I saw her. They weren't there the day before." Mihai took one in his hands. It was the same yarn Anna had used to knit Elena's shawl all those years ago. Together they returned to the old trapdoor. Mihai showed her the drawing on the wall, the carved calendar, the strand of hair. Maria stared at the room in silence, then took a photo of the drawing. "Someone lived here," she said, "but not just for survival. Look, there's structure, ritual." She was waiting for something. They followed the map further north, beyond the red X. That's when things got stranger. About half a kilometer past the marked spot, they found something neither of them expected. A fence. Not a modern one, but old wooden stakes, hand-tied with twine, forming a circular boundary around a clearing. In the center of the circle was a stone structure, square, low to the ground, like a well or bunker, covered with boards and overgrowth. Maria stepped closer. "This isn't on any modern survey." Mihai's eyes narrowed. "It's too deliberate." Inside was a stairwell, narrow and steep, cut directly into stone. And that's when the smell hit them. Rot, mold, iron. They descended slowly, flashlights shaking. The room at the bottom was larger than the first. And this time it wasn't none. It wasn't empty. There were photographs pinned to the walls. Hundreds. Most were blurred, taken at night. Long-range shots of hikers, villagers, even children walking near the ridge. A few were clear portraits, almost of Elena, as a teen, as a woman. Pale, sunken cheeks, hair tangled but long. In some, she was smiling faintly. In others, she looked lost. Beneath the photos was a table. On it sat 3 objects. A spool of red yarn. A broken wristwatch Mihai's, lost 20 years ago during a search mission. And a cassette tape, unlabeled. Maria looked to Mihai. "We need to leave." But Mihai couldn't move. He reached for the tape, pocketed it. Then in the far corner of the room, he saw something that made his heart stall. A second calendar, this one not carved but drawn on paper. Today's date was circled, and beneath it, written in the same careful cursive, "I'm sorry, Papa, I had to disappear again." They ran. Out of the bunker, through the woods, back to the ranger station. As they reached the edge of the burned-out ruins, Maria stopped suddenly. "Do you hear that?" Mihai turned. From somewhere deep in the trees, a voice soft, high, wavering began humming. A tune he hadn't heard in 24 years. The lullaby he used to sing her to sleep with. Maria pulled out her phone, hit record. But when they moved toward the sound, it vanished. That night, back in Borca, Mihai sat in front of an old cassette player with Maria beside him. They inserted the tape. Static. Then, breathing.
A voice.
Elena's voice. "Papa, if you found this, it means I didn't run fast enough." Click.
End.
Mihai didn't speak for hours after playing the tape. The voice was undeniably Elena's older, deeper, yet still carrying that slight musical rhythm she'd always had. But the line echoed in his mind like a riddle. "If you found this, it means I didn't run fast enough." Run from who? From what? Was she being hunted? Trapped? Had someone found her again after she left that hidden bunker? Maria uploaded the audio to a private forensic forum, asking quietly for any experts in analog sound degradation. Within a day, someone replied, "It was recorded within the last year, not 24 years ago." Whatever Elena had run from, it was recent. The local police still didn't believe Mihai's full story. He told them about the trapdoor, the underground room, even gave them the second map. But when they arrived at the site days later, it was gone. Completely. The moss-covered slab where the door once stood had been removed. The area had been swept clean, like someone had erased it. The wooden fencing was gone. The stones rearranged. Even the red yarn figures Maria had tied to mark the location had been cut from the trees. The only thing left? A burned branch nailed to a tree with a single word scorched into the bark. "Stop!" Maria was stunned. "They're watching us," she whispered, "even now." The next day, Mihai did something he hadn't done in years. He opened Elena's bedroom for the first time since 1998. The room was untouched. Her stuffed animals sat in formation across the bed. Her shelves still held her school books, arranged by color. He walked in slowly, trailing a hand across the desk where she once wrote letters to imaginary kingdoms. Then he stopped. Her drawer was open, and something had been placed inside. A fresh drawing. Same red pencil, the same curved lines. It showed a tall figure in the woods standing beside a smaller figure. In the trees around them, eyes, dozens of them, watching from every branch. Beneath the sketch, it's not just one, it never was. Mihai drove straight to Maria's house. She stared at the drawing and said one word. "Occult." He blinked. "What?" "There's an old legend," she said. "Local folklore, not just ghost stories, about a group called the Echo Keepers. Supposedly, they lived in the woods, centuries ago. A breakaway sect from a monastery. Believed the forest held voices of the dead. They built underground rooms to listen. People say they kidnapped children, believing their voices were purer. It was dismissed as myth. But my grandmother told me once. She thought they never really left. You think Elena was taken by them?" Maria hesitated. "I think she escaped from them, but maybe only for a while. They decided to return to the mountains one final time. But this time they brought help." Maria contacted two fellow researchers, forest mapping specialists. Both were skeptical but intrigued by her findings, especially the red yarn patterns and hidden structures. Together, the group of four ascended the trail. The sky darkened quicker than expected, clouds thickening like bruises overhead. A light rain fell cold and steady. They reached the ridgeline by dusk, and that's when they saw it. Not just one underground room, but several. Scattered across a slope, barely visible beneath vines and decaying wood, were at least 6 trapdoors. None marked on any modern map. None seen in satellite scans due to dense canopy. One had an open door. The researchers descended while Maria documented the structure. Inside were chairs, old robes, shelves with hand-drawn symbols, and sound equipment. Analog recorders, dozens of cassette tapes labeled with dates going back decades. One had a name written on it. Elena Dobre, Session 12. Mihai dropped to his knees.
He pressed play.
Static, then a voice. Elena. Not crying, not begging. Reciting. In the woods remember what men forget. The trees bear witness. They hear the blood. They echoed the pain. Click. Tape ends. They took the tapes, photos, and evidence and left before nightfall. But as they reached the edge of the woods, Maria gasped. Their trail markers, ribbons, carvings, sticks were gone, replaced with yarn figures, tied high in the trees. New ones, still swinging in the wind. One of the researchers checked their GPS. The screen glitched. No signal. No compass. They were being turned around by someone who knew the forest better, by the ones who had lived in it. And as the sun vanished behind the mountains, a sound rolled through the pines. Not wind, not animals, voices, dozens of them, repeating one word barely audible but distinct. They ran. Mihai clutched the tapes. Maria led them toward the riverbed, using memory instead of coordinates. The rain turned heavier. Mud pulled at their boots. Branches tore skin, but they didn't stop. Not until they reached the edge of the clearing near Mihai's old cabin. The voices had stopped. The forest was still, too still. They turned around and saw them. Figures in the trees. Not moving, just standing, wearing faded clothes. Some barefoot, some tall, some small, all silent, all watching. They didn't return the next day. They didn't speak of it to the authorities yet. Maria uploaded their findings anonymously to a secure archive. Mihai hid the tapes in a metal lockbox beneath his daughter's bed. And then he found it. One last envelope. No postmark. Just his name in red pencil. Inside, a small square photograph of Elena, as she looked now, standing at the tree line, eyes wide, hand outstretched, and in her palm a lighter, a flame caught mid-bloom, and beneath it a message. They made me remember. Now I'll make them forget. 3 days passed without a word. No footsteps in the snow, no notes, no more drawings.
Just silence.
For the first time in years, Mihai wished the voices would return, that they'd chant, that they'd threaten, that something would give him direction. Instead, he sat by the fire in his cabin, staring at the photo of Elena. She looked calm, resolved, almost finished. The lighter in her hand haunted him. What had she meant? They made me remember. Now I'll make them forget. What memory had been buried so deep it took 24 years to return? Maria stayed with him. They barely spoke. There were no more theories left, only waiting. On the fourth night, the wind shifted. A warm breeze pushed through the valley, unnatural for early winter. It carried a scent that set Mihai upright in his chair. But not from his chimney, from the ridge. They ran outside. Above them, on the slope beyond the trail, an orange glow bloomed through the trees. Not wild, not random. Controlled. Intentional. A fire. Mihai grabbed his coat and rushed toward the source. Maria followed, recorder in hand, though it struggled to pick up anything through the static flooding in. They reached the edge of the first clearing and saw it. The circle of underground structures, the bunkers, the hidden rooms, the cult's listening chambers were burning. Every one of them. And at the center of the flames stood a single figure, Elena. She was barefoot, wrapped in a red shawl, her hair long and tangled like vines. She didn't move, didn't look away from the fire. Mihai called her name. She didn't flinch. Then slowly she turned her head. Their eyes met. And for the first time in 24 years, Mihai saw his daughter not as a memory, not as a ghost, but as something solid. Breathing. Alive. He stepped forward. So did Maria. But Elena raised her hand not in fear, but in warning. Behind her, the fire roared louder. The structures were collapsing. The trees around them blackened, but did not catch. Only the rooms. Only the secrets. And then they heard it. Screams. Not Elena's. From below. Dozens of voices, men, women shouting from underground. Pounding, trapped. The bunkers had locked from the outside. Mihai looked at her, horrified. Elena, what did you do? Her voice was calm, barely above the crackle. They kept me in silence. They made me forget who I was. But I remembered, and I waited, just like they taught me. Mihai stepped forward, his voice cracking. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. They'll die. Elena's eyes shimmered. They've already died, over and over, in others, in me. She dropped the lighter at her feet and walked toward them. The forest behind her lit up like the edge of the sun. The flames did not chase her. They stood back, like obedient animals. Watching, honoring. She stopped in front of her father, and for a long moment nothing moved. Then she said the only thing she could. I missed you, Papa. Mihai's tears came fast, hot. He reached out, touching her cheek, afraid she'd disappear.
But she didn't.
She leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder, and then collapsed. Maria helped carry her down the slope. By the time they reached the trail, emergency sirens were already echoing from the valley. Someone had spotted the blaze from a distance, but by the time help arrived, the flames had died on their own. No spread, no damage to the forest, only ash. Where the cult had once listened, there was now only silence. Elena was taken to a rural clinic. She didn't speak for the first 2 days. She barely ate. Doctors examined her physically. She was surprisingly strong. Scarred, but strong. Mentally, they said, the trauma ran deeper than language. Mihai didn't leave her side. He sat by her bed holding her hand, whispering stories she once loved. Stories of goats and ridge trails, of drawings and lullabies. On the third morning, Elena opened her eyes and whispered. They called themselves echoes because they don't create. They only repeat, over and over, until you forget you were ever something whole. She began drawing again. First trees, then rivers, then faces. Some were familiar, some not. One she refused to show anyone. She folded it in half, tucked it into Mihai's coat pocket and said, "Don't open it unless I disappear again." He never opened it, but he never let it go either. Maria turned the research over to an international investigative group. Within weeks, they traced connections to other regions, other disappearances, other listening sites, fires, warnings, survivors who spoke in whispers. Elena's name was never released publicly. At her request, she remained anonymous. 6 months later, Mihai and Elena moved, not far, just beyond the mountain range, into a small cabin with wide windows and no shadows. Maria visited often. They laughed again. Elena began to sing again. And every year on September 17th, Mihai took a walk up the ridge alone, just to breathe, to thank the mountain for what it had taken and what it had finally given back. The villagers still whisper about the fire, about the girl who came back, about what burned that night. Some say it was a rescue, others a reckoning, but no one goes past the ridge anymore. Not since the fire, not since the voices stopped. Because deep down they know, the forest doesn't forget, but maybe, just maybe, it forgives.